Most people underestimate the importance of emotional perception or awareness, and it's often trivialized as weakness, especially in men. However, being able to read emotions in other people can be incredibly useful and has a wide range of applications in understanding interpersonal relationships. One of the most obvious and least recognized forms of emotional analysis is the facial action coding system, or FACS for short. People have been taking cues from others' facial expressions for millennia, but these cues have only recently been scientifically codified. Specific facial muscle movements, eye movements, and head movements have been found to be essentially universal in the expression of some emotions. So if you can recognize these movements, or the proper combination of these movements, you can tell which emotion or emotions the person exhibiting the expressions is feeling. The research into codifying specific emotions began in the 1970s, but the Dictionary of Emotion-Specific Action Units, the term used to describe a certain combination of muscle activations, is constantly being updated. Recently, the utility of facial expression recognition has been popularized by mainstream media in shows such as Lie to Me, which is about a group of people who use these involuntary facial cues to define truth from fiction with the goal of solving or preventing crimes. Obviously, shows like this are somewhat of an overdramatization, but they're based in science. While such shows generally overemphasize the amount of information that accurate interpretation of emotion will reveal, they're also generally pretty accurate in the way that those emotions are presented, meaning only for brief periods of time. These momentary flashes are called microexpressions. Most people don't keep their emotions on their faces at all times. This is even more true in cases where they're trying to disguise their emotions or not show any emotion at all. Microexpressions are involuntary emotional reactions essentially hardwired into us by social evolution. Microexpressions occur rapidly after a stimulus, within about 260 milliseconds, and are very brief, lasting less than half a second, so being able to recognize and properly identify specific action units and emotions is very difficult. You may be thinking that mastering such an ability would be a time-consuming process for relatively little reward, but there are many practical applications that microexpression recognition can be useful for. An excellent example is poker. The entire game of poker basically boils down to being able to tell whether or not your opponents are trying to bluff you while being able to bluff them in return. Yes, it's more complicated than that with mathematical odds and whatnot, but if you can accurately read and play your opponents, your odds of winning are significantly higher. A common expression among poker players is, you play the man, not the cards. Because microexpressions are involuntary expressions of emotion, they happen even when people are trying to suppress their emotions. Practice can dampen them, and the intensity of the expression is proportional to the intensity of the emotion, so in poker specifically, they're usually already fairly subtle expressions because there's not a high degree of emotional investment, or at least there shouldn't be. Some players also try to manufacture microexpressions to help sell their bluffs, so telling real expressions from fake ones can be difficult. But it's pretty hard to successfully fake a microexpression, so many players try to avoid this entirely by expressing as little emotion as possible, hence the term poker face, or by disguising their facial expressions to limit others' ability to accurately read them, which is why you see a lot of poker players wearing sunglasses or hats. Even with all these caveats, though, having a basic understanding of the facial action coding system and microexpressions can help you win the psychological aspect of poker, and obviously the more you practice, the better you'll get at reading others' emotions and controlling your own. So I'm going to give you a few action units associated with the emotions you're most likely to see playing poker. The first emotion is happiness or joy, and you're most likely to see this emotion when you get if your opponent gets an especially good hand or thinks that someone is falling for his bluff. It's characterized by cheek raising and a lip corner pulling smile, so it looks something like this. A second emotion that you're likely to come across is fear, which you're most likely to see if your opponent believes someone is going to call their bluff. It's characterized by many different action units, not necessarily all at the same time, but rather in certain combinations with each other. These action units include inner and outer brow raising, like this, brow lowering, like that, upper eyelid raising, like this, lid tightening, which sort of looks like squinting, but my eyes are kind of closed, so it's hard to tell, lip stretcher, which is sort of like a frown, and jaw drop, which is pretty self-explanatory. An example of a combination of these would look something like this. but you're not going to see an expression that exaggerated at a poker table, obviously. A final expression or emotion you might see is disgust, which you'll see if your opponent is having a particularly bad set of luck. In most cases, they'll likely fold this hand, but be ready to capitalize if they don't and try to buy their way out of a bluff. Disgust is characterized by nose wrinkling, lip corner depression, which looks like a frown, or lower lip depression, which sort of looks like lower jaw drop, but with less emphasis. These are by no means all the emotions that you're going to see when playing poker, but they're a good starting point. If you're interested in seeing examples of more of these action units, iMotions.com has an excellent set of GIFs that can help you study. I hope you enjoyed this brief introduction to microexpression reading and the facial action coding system and their practical applications. Thank you.